All right, let's pray. Dear God in heaven, we thank you so very much for this time together. Especially this morning, you blessed us much with the light you're giving us. We invite your presence now with us in this afternoon meeting through your Holy Spirit. We thank you that we have this opportunity now to study the Vespers classes that have been given by Elder Tess. They're so important to us at this time, just before the Sunday law. So we ask that you give us wisdom and guidance in this meeting as we share our thoughts and as this study, the first study will be read. Give us clarity. And we thank you again for all the blessings you give to us, your mercy, your love, of course, your grace. And we pray for your blessing around the world, for your believers, your movement, people that are in the Sabbath now, and those perhaps that are not, have gone through it. And we thank you that we can be together as a movement of people. So much to learn and so much to unlearn. And we thank you for hearing our prayers, for blessing us abundantly with your love and grace. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so let me pull the file up. This goes back to February. The first Vespers class. So what we're going to work on is, and the notes we'll be emailing out. They are on the website. Not all of them are there, but we'll email them out as we do them. I'll go ahead and start, and then we'll pass it around unless somebody else wanted to just plain lead out. I think we agreed to all participate.
Yes.
So the link is there. This is navigating the complex. So let's review how we got to this point. We're in the process of circling, coming back to the same points over and over. We started with looking at 1888. There was a conflict in 1888, theological debate. Before we get to that theological debate, let us see the internal division within Adventism. Let's consider how we look at the whole of the 1888, the whole of the history within Adventism surrounding that controversial time period, surrounding the Minneapolis General Conference. To approach that complicated history, we've discussed how complex is the history as compared to the prophetic narrative or the cliches that Adventism develops. Where did we go to understand the reality of what the history looks like as opposed to the prophetic narrative? We went to the trumpets. The trumpets looked like the following. You have the first trumpet, the second trumpet, the first trumpet, the second trumpet, and what point does the second trumpet sack Rome? The second trumpet, the sack of Rome by the Vandals, was 455 AD. The third trumpet was the Huns and Attila the Hun, who died in 453. So if you want to draw what the trumpets look like, it goes first, second, the third happens within the second, while the second trumpet is still blowing, and then comes the fourth. So we can see that the history of the trumpets is much more complicated than the kind of simple prophetic story of Revelation that has 1, 2, 3, and 4. The history is stated simply, but when drawn out in its proper historical context, it's actually the first, the second, and the third coexisting with the second, and then the fourth, which is really only 1 year. Did everybody follow that? So Revelation gives it to you basically like this: 1, 2, 3, and 4, when this is actually the reality, or they overlap each other. We're not going into the study of the trumpets, but simply laying out the prophetic simple version as opposed to the reality. Even when we draw it out, it's still not that simplistic because it's not just 4 Germanic tribes that trouble Western Rome. It wasn't like there were 4 tribes and that's all the problems that Western Rome had. So you had a complicated history of the complex reality. And then you have the very simple prophetic narrative giving God's people a kind of a structure, just a simple pinpoint to hold on to so they know what is happening in a mess of events. Somebody else like to read?
I can. We went to the history of the trumpets only to show how the 1888 history was complicated. We have these simple Adventist catchphrases that are true. We say things like, Butler and Smith rejected the prophet, they abandoned the foundations. We have these catchphrases, but we don't understand what it looks like to actually walk through that history. This is where they see the simple to see what the Sunday law looks like, as well as the loud cry, close of probation, and the second advent. They see these histories as simple. People make comments on her videos. Oops.
Sorry.
It's okay. Sorry, thanks. Okay. People make comments on her videos stating that everything that Elder Tess teaches is far too complicated. God isn't going to teach his people or require his people to understand some complicated story of Afghanistan, Russia, and all the events, gender, LGBT. It's just really going to be simple. It's just going to be about Sabbath, Sunday. It's going to be easy to see. Another example, the Reformation, simple. You had a noble, brave Martin Luther battling the wicked Pope with the devil horns. It's about John the Baptist, simple, clear, easy message. We'd all pass if we were there. We'd recognize the Son of God. We'd all accept John the Baptist and recognize those evil Pharisees who refused to see the prophecy. So the problem with Adventism is that they just expect to see the events as simple, but the reality is that when you actually walk through the history, it is much more complicated. It's a tangled web of mess. Therefore, the Sunday law is going to be much more complex, even though we have a simplistic prophetic story. We need to see the complexity of historical events. So when we go to the history of 1888, we should be able to appreciate the complexity of the 1888 history. We need to understand the interplay of the different events in the history so that we don't make the same mistakes of Adventism, the mistakes that the General Conference leadership made. So the first point of the discussion was the history of 1888. Second, we moved to a discussion of the complexity of history versus our simple prophetic parable stories. Third point, we went from the understanding the complexity of history to say, well, how do you take a tangled history, whether it's past or present day, and understand it? And then we began to discuss the lateral reading, how we research, especially using external information. Some of the principles would apply to the inspiration as well. So that the board of work just shows that going from 1888 to the complexity of the history, lateral reading, and sifting sources. And that's the progression they made. So we made a point about needing to know the historical context to the complexity rather than just the simple, so that we don't make a mistake with the simple. This knowledge especially applies to today when we're doing this in the midst of the information war. To do lateral reading, We need to sift our sources. This is where we really sort of diverge from our topic of 1888, which we will at some stage get back to. But this is where you take the lateral reading, so see the boardwork at 901, and assuming that none of those are Fox News, these are all good sources, quote, good sources, still we might only agree with 20% of this one, or 80% of that one, 95%, 5%, 60%, 75%, etc. It depends on the article. We don't necessarily agree with everything that everyone says, referring to those people on the left. Then Elder Tess might take the 95% and share that on the media broadcast. But she'll write a little at the beginning so that the people will know what is worth picking up out of that article, and hopefully just don't take the whole of it. It's important to get to the point of what's being shared. Just because Elder Tess is sharing an article doesn't mean she agrees with everything that the article says. And a lot of times she'll be picking up a particular point that this article is making. Like for instance, that last one had to do with that political, the guy who was talking about the culture and how religion and politics are a filter, but culture is from the eye. And so in that article, there's a lot, she agreed with that idea that we're coming from a point of view of culture, but we're seeing it through different lenses, different filters of religion and politics. But she didn't believe his actual stand on politics, because you could see that he was coming from a personal political angle, and she didn't agree with his stance on politics. So we have to be able to understand what to take from these articles and what to ignore. It's kind of like cherry picking, because we have to cherry pick out what we know, what we understand of God's character and the points he's trying to make, what he's trying to teach us. So we have to be really careful of what we're reading and what we're watching. Okay, so back to the presentation. Sorry. Perhaps Elder Tess might find a good point in 20%. For example, she read a really good article lately on foreign policy that spoke about Russia. And she didn't believe that the 80% of the article was, and she didn't believe that the 80% of the article was not worth anything, but that article made one really good point that she believed will come into a presentation somewhere. But she didn't share the article because she didn't believe that 80% was actually useful. The 20% was a really valid piece of information. So the sifting of the sources, we went from 1888 to understanding the complexity of history, including our present day history, where Adventism is making a lot of their most dangerous mistakes. They don't understand what the history is naturally, that the history is naturally complex. We need to navigate through the past and present events using lateral reading. And even though the lateral reading, even through the lateral reading, we need to know how to sift through the materials, which means we need to know how to take information and know what to take and what to leave. From there, we moved to understand the sifting of its sources. And we went to some examples, which we were left-wing examples. Elder Tess started to explain issues with left wing and why she would find some sources more problematic. We use Max Blumenthal as an example, but the target of her criticism was subtle. Democracy Now!
Just a quick, so this is the presentation, the first class that wasn't recorded then, right? That's where Max Blumenthal first came up. Is that right?
Yeah, so in the present, so this first Vespers is pretty much explaining the first two Vespers
Oh, there was
that were
two, okay.
not that were not recorded. So there were two Vespers before this first one that we're reading that were presented to the Oceania group, and they weren't recorded because they didn't realize the conversation that would be come of it, and they didn't realize how important the topic. And then after they present them, they're like, wow, we should really be recording these. And so in this presentation right here, she's going back to the board work that had not been erased, and she's pointing at the different places on the board, and she's saying, okay, this is what we talked about. This is what we talked about here. This is what we talked about there. And she's going over that information that they had gone over in those first two presentations that were not recorded.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. We need to navigate. Oh, wait. Did I ever? Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, yeah. I want to go back. Okay. There. We used Max Blumenthal as an example, but the target of her criticism was subtle. Democracy Now! They say a lot of good things, but picking on them a little bit, she is trying to explain why a source that you would think mostly good, you should still critically sift, especially that branch of the left-wing journalism.
So that would be what she's talking about here then.
Yeah, sifting.
Yeah, it comes to the list. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So the title of it is Democracy Now! So you would think that was really good. But if you start looking at Max Blumenthal, you'll realize that he's like radically left wing, right? Wasn't his name under that gray zone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
he's the founder, I think, of the Gray Zone.
okay, the founder. Okay. And
Yeah.
so, you're not going to want to pick an article from the Gray Zone or from Max Blumenthal, right? Even though it looks like, the topic's democracy now. Wow, that should be good, but no, it's not. Okay.
Yeah, she's also referring to Democracy Now! That I don't know if it's just a YouTube channel, it's maybe a website as well, but Democracy Now! Is who she's referring to.
Right.
And that he's connected, or I don't know if he's connected, but that's, she doesn't recommend that one. She was talking about that again recent.
Right. I think, I can't swear on, go ahead.
Yeah, I believe before he started his own, the Gray Zone, I think he was interviewed a lot in Democracy Now! Through by Amy Goodman.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I know I've seen some of those videos. I've seen people share them, the Democracy Now! Videos.
Yeah, because there's others in the Gray Zone now, like Ben Norton, who used to be a producer for Democracy Now!
Okay. So I think there's a paragraph above this, isn't there, that we didn't, did I finish that?
Can you finish that? You're right here.
Okay. Oh, okay. 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 So thank you. Okay. So we got to the examples and some questions were asked. We were discussing how to sift through the sources. By this stage of the movement, everyone would know that this is not all, but majority would be left-wing sources. Elder Tess posted a question. How did we, this movement, become left-wing in the first place? We took a step right back and said, okay, how did we come to be left-wing in the first place? A question was posed in this bottom line. So scroll up so we can see all the board work. Okay, so in the political spectrum with the left wing, moderate or centrist, and the right wing, where was the movement politically in 1989 to the first 3 quarters of 2018? So the answer was that was given, and everyone agreed that the movement was leaning towards the far right. So you can see on this chart, we have the left on the left, the right on the right, and at where you can see the word freedom there, and under the word Bible, there's morality, traditional values, USA glorious land, Islam, capitalism. So in 1989, we were very conservative, and we were falling all the way over there, that far onto the right. But as we've been learning more about equality, we have shifted from the right through the moderate and to the left side. Okay, so any questions on that? Does that make sense? Okay. So another question was posed. Why were we here leaning towards the far right until 2018? And we gave some reasons as to why this movement would view the Republican Party and politically conservatism as supporting their biblical and prophetic worldview. We discussed their views of morality. We stayed really general. Traditional family values, the US as the glorious land, the prophetic explanation of Islam, and capitalism as the way of the economy. Then another question was posed. What moved us from the right wing to the left wing? What moved us in late 2018 from the far right to the left? None of us were convinced by the news articles. It was a prophetic shift. So we have written down 2 of the 4 that Elder Tess wants to review. We have the first one, which is the history, but this is the prophetic history, and that's the history moral majority. And this is a reform line, particularly from 1979 to 1989, which is the history of the moral majority. And then the second one is the Pyrrhus. So we shift from the right wing to the left wing just before 2019. From September of 2018 to November of 2019. One of the first of the 4 reasons that Elder Tess wanted to list for that shift is prophetic history, relevant, attached to our reform line, particularly the moral majority in connecting republicanism to conservative Protestant evangelicalism and seeing the union of the church and state. So the second point took more of our time. And that refers back to that other board work above. Someone mentioned that this was Pyrrhus, the history of the 3rd and the 4th Diadoki War, the prophetic role of Pyrrhus as the king of the south. We narrowed that down to particularly to the Battle of Ipsus. So here Josephine took us back, and we made the point last week, swung us back to point 2 of our journey, which is Pyrrhus, that we've been on. And she said that this history is another example of where we have a simple prophetic story. And you can see that under the trumpets, the prophetic versus reality in the board work at 1511. And then Daniel 8:8 is at the board work of 1515, down below a little bit, that shows the death of Alexander the Great and the rising up of the 4 generals. It's another example of how prophecy gives us this beautiful, simple picture that Elder Tess is grateful for, because her brain can't hold that much more at once. And those are her words. Okay. So do all of those, the board work, is that making sense? So she's showing us the Alexander to Ipsus and the 4 Diadoki wars in between. At Ipsus, we've got the 4 generals. Before then, we under Alexander, you have Daniel 8:8 and 9:21 to 22. So it is all that. So that's these are the pictures that were on the board and that she's pointing to, and she's explaining what they were talking about when she had written that board work originally. Okay. So it gives us just what we need to be oriented, but the reality is not that simple. The reality is much more complicated. The simple is still true, but it's the complexity that we need to see if we're going to navigate present day. So Josephine took us to Daniel 8:8, the time period of the 4 Diadoki Wars, and we revised how these wars showed the complexity that Daniel 8:8 makes simple. Then we went to Ipsis and showed how this second point, and that's in the board work we're seeing here at 1612, of our the second point of our 4 moved this movement from being politically oriented from right-wing conservative movement to the left-wing political position. We have shown the complexity of the history from the simple models, beginning with the 1888 history to now, in 2018 began to shift from the right wing to the left wing. Okay, so we're just repeating what we've seen already, but this is what the board what she's pointing to as she's talking about these topics. And then you can see under board work 1650 that she's added under Max Blumenthal, Democracy Now! As 2018 moved from the right wing to the left wing. Then we took a point, we kind of stepped away from that for a second and just made one little side point about Panium. We were still discussing how history is complicated, how the fall of Western Rome was complicated, and our parables help us navigate the complications. It helps to orient us by giving us the very simple steps. Elder Tess to Brendan, so she's saying to Brendan, we took the complexity of history with the simplicity of the parable, and we took that to Panium. Lead us through as far as you want to, understanding the complexity of the simplicity of the parables, navigating through the complexity of history, and how we took that to Panium. And so she's asking Brendan to explain that. Does anyone else want to jump in?
I could read some.
Great, thank you.
Can you appear where it says Brandon?
Yes.
Okay. I have no recollection from last week about the particular things, but if I was to comment on it, a lot of things happened over the past 6 to 8 months, and it has been quite messy. Actually, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be saying. Elder Tess, does anyone else remember that point that was made last week? Does anyone else have anything to contribute on that? Catherine, we spoke about how Panium was beginning like a Cold War period. Also, we compared it with some of the lines of World War I and World War II. It's a Cold War. And then when we're looking at World War II, we're comparing pirates with Hitler. Hitler died at what would be Panium. The question then is, that means that Putin or Russia died at Panium. How can then Putin do any kind of Cold War now? Is that enough for now? Elder Tess, yes, that's accurate. that was what we're discussing last week. So we took the complexity. We know that today is complex, but we have brought us to, oh, wait a minute. We know that today is complex, but where you have brought us to is the simple story. We have World War I plus World War II equals World War III. We all know that after World War II, once we get to this point in time, Hitler dies. And Hitler, in the prophetic parable that we apply to the present day, Hitler represents Vladimir Putin. So then we ask, if Putin is alive and becoming more belligerent now, what does our prophetic parable, what does our prophetic parable teaching to us teach us? Does anyone else want to continue on from there with any other thoughts? Brandon, did you bring anything back? And we have the board work there with the world wars in it. Brandon, it did, as Catherine was saying those things, it brought it back, but I'm still not too sure what the next bit was from memory. I'm sorry. Elder Tess, it's fine. This is where we got to the point last week where it started to move really fast. So this is why we need to do this again. Marie, I think that you're saying as Hitler was becoming more belligerent, so now Putin, that the King of the South, as he is now headed for death, he is also doing the same. Elder Tess, we have this written as 2021, and this is Panium. This is Panium. Okay, so we're up at the top. Okay, I see what you say. Okay, that the 2021 right here, and that's where Putin's, and are we at the top right here where it says Brandon?
You were down here on this sentence here.
I don't see your cursor. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry, I lost my place. So I didn't know where I was at.
Sorry, I backed up to the board.
Oh no. Okay, when we're with Elder Tests, we have the written. We have this written as 2021, right there where it says dies, and this is Panium. What date would this be in the World War II on the line of World War I and II? Marie, would it be 1945? Elder Tess, yes. So we're now in 2022. Hitler's dead. He's not heading for death. He is dead. So if Vladimir Putin is Hitler, can you see the problem, Marie? Oh, I see. Marie, okay, he's dead too. but his kingdom is spiraling down between Panium and the Sunday Law. So he symbolizes death of Hitler now, but there is a progression of his kingdom being destroyed. Elder Tess. Sure, I think that's touching on points that we might expand on a little bit more. Josephine, you had your hand up. Josephine, I was going to make a point. I'm too ahead of the point that you're making now, so I don't want to say it just yet. Elder Tess, do you want me to come back to you? Raise your hand again at the moment when we get to that point. I want to hear your point, Brandon. Brandon, so that point, I can get to the. Oops, I'm in the wrong line. The dilemma is, you've got the death of Hitler or Putin, and yet the external events, Putin appears to be getting stronger. Elder Tess, great. You've really articulated well our problem. Now we want a solution. Brandon, so at that point, I can't get to the next point. Sorry, Elder Tess. It's dropped out of my mind. Elder Tess, that's fine, Raymond. Raymond, isn't it like Hitler was symbolized as the king of the South? So we see him die and the king of the South switches to Stalin. No? Elder Tess, no, Stalin has, they don't switch through that history. Not in this parable. You could put it in there, but I don't think that's what the parable is trying to teach us. I don't think that where it's going. Wait, let me read that again. That you can put it in there, but I don't think that's what the parable is trying to teach us. I don't think that's where it's going, Catherine. We talked about 2019, which is on the board, and we talked about how we have the death of a dictator marked there. But from another perspective, we could also see the rise of a dictator. And both Trump, and so we had to work out how that could make any sense. And that makes sense because it marks the change in his behavior at that point. So we use the same principle. Then for 2021, we can see that there's a change of behavior possible there at 2021 in a same way. So I see what they're talking about. Elder Tess, so the prophetic parables we're going to hear. What study is that part of, Catherine? Revelation? I don't know if it's Revelations, but like Napoleon? Elder Tess. Yes, it's the line of Revelation. Revolutions? Yeah, Revolutions.
Yeah, revolutions.
So from 2018, we're teaching that Trump dies in 2019. We're teaching that he dies and there's a new dictatorship. But all the way through, we never taught that that was someone other than Trump. So what were we teaching about the death and resurrection of one man? To remind us on the line of the revolutions, in the line of the French Revolution. We have two applications, the Russian Revolution, the German Revolution, and the American Civil War. We see there is that waymark. There's a death and resurrection of a dictator. We know that it is Trump who dies and Trump who resurrects. So it is symbolizing something. Josephine, have we come to your point? Josephine, I think that Catherine made it because I remembered her making that point last week. And I remembered the point for this week. But I think she made it about Trump dying. But when he rises up, he's going to be worse than he was before. So with the sixth kingdom, I don't know. In my mind, when the sixth kingdom goes down, it's going to rise up and the kingdom's going to be worse. Elder Tess, so you expand the point quite a little bit there. This is Trump dying, and this is Trump resurrecting.
Real quick, right back here. Trump dying and then Trump resurrecting.
Right. See, resurrecting, and this is the change. A simple story trying to tell us that there is going to be a change of behavior. So you brought us to the story of the sixth kingdom and the seventh kingdom. You're telling us the story of not an entirely new entity. It's the same entity, but what we're teaching through the end of 2008 through 2009 is that all that this is symbolizing is the change of behavior, not this simplistic narrative of one dies and one resurrects. One kingdom crumbles, which doesn't really happen in an era of globalization anymore.
Yeah, just to note that it was 2018 and 2019. I think you said 2008 and 2009.
Oh,
Just to clarify that for a recording.
yeah, 2018 through 2019.
Unless I heard you wrong.
Yeah, I might have said that. I don't really recall. And when the whole new one rises up, this is not what it's talking about. It's talking about the fact that Trump, in the history of the first impeachment, was going to radically change in his behavior. He was going to die at one type of dictatorship because we already knew that he already was one. And he's going to rise up as a new type of dictator. We have spoken before about the stage that it took for Russia to turn into an authoritarian state power that it is now. it didn't all happen in 1999 when Putin became the prime minister, or when he became the president, or when he took over from the oligarchs, or when he took control over the state media or the internet, or when he changed the Russian constitution. At what point did Russia transform into an authoritarian state? You could argue none of them. Elder Tess would argue all of them. What we're tracing, what these parables are teaching us, is these step-by-step changes that are occurring in the story of the histories of the revolutions, occurring within the US, Molly. You had your hand up? Molly, I was just looking at things concerning Hitler. I thought that when Trump was resurrected, he was reflecting the character. It was the transformation of the character of Trump before, when he died, to Hitler. When he resurrected, become a tyrant. Elder Tess, you see that he's still the same person. He hasn't radically changed, but he is embroiled, emboldened. He was fascist before, but now, when the first impeachment took place, and when he finds that after all that he did, they can't physically remove him, but still has maintained his power base, the loyalty of his people, the loyalty of the Republican Party, especially. He that much bolder, and he also now feels like more of a victim. So he's angry, and he's emboldened by the first attempt to remove him from government. So yes, we're seeing the worsening. This is what this parable is trying to teach us when we come to the revolutions.
It's interesting that, I don't know, this point, I don't know, it just struck me that with what we're seeing now, how he has his supporters, his you know, the people.
Yeah.
But in that instance, though, it was dependent on the Republican Party in order to get through the impeachment the way that he did.
And you could see him dig his heels in now, even against his own family and people that were close to him in his administration.
Yeah.
Like Barr and all the other people that he had in place.
Makes you wonder how many of them maybe are thinking we should have stopped this the first time around. You wonder if any of them have come to their senses on that. But the voters couldn't help him through this part. This required the Republican Party.
You got to look at the whole situation and how messy it's become, as far as a political situation. And now I must look to the world like we're in chaos. That's what it looks like to me, Every time I turn on, watch the news, it feels like chaos.
This message helps us to make sense of it.
Yeah. If it wasn't for that, I go, wow. I'll read this next paragraph, and if somebody wants to jump in there, you're more than welcome to. So if we take that from the Revelations, the death and resurrection of fascism, we bring that down to the story of Panium, and we're still not really going into Panium. We're going to pull us back from that soon, get us back to this switch from the right wing to the left wing. Elder Tess wants to pull us back from this in a movement, but we're just expanding on the thought about how simple our stories are. They have to be to try and help us to understand the complexity of what's happening, because it reminds us that Adventism believes that the trumpet looked like this, straightforward, and in this, which is lined up 1, 2, 3, 4, straightforward, and this mesh of history, which is the reality. Therefore, today they expect present day events to be straightforward, when in actuality it is complicated. The straightforward is the prophetic narrative, but the reality is the intertwining of stories. Not the prophetic isn't really reality, but I hope you can get how Elder Tess is using those terms. Yeah, you can see the way it's laid out. It's more complex than it really is. You'd have to have a scoreboard just to keep it all straight.
Yeah. So you got the death of
Mhm.
one form of a dictator, and then the rise of a more emboldened dictator.
Right.
And then here you have Putin dying. And I remember she mentions it in, I think it was the Brazil School of Prophets, which was quite a while ago. She just mentioned about, Hitler's death here,
Mhm.
and how this was Panium, but this was Hitler, and this is Russia. This was the king of the North, and this was the king of the South. So anyways, that's kind of what she was touching on.
I thought it was interesting too, in that paragraph where when they failed to impeach Trump, that he felt like a victim. I don't know where it clearly said he felt like a victim, and let's see where, there it is.
Yeah.
And he also now feels like more of a victim, which to me now is kind of clearer, if I'm understanding correctly, because that's the character that we're seeing rise up in these men's rights groups, and was clearly seen in the Depp Amber Heard trial, that Depp's attorneys used that to argue on Depp's behalf that he was the victim, where the perpetrator plays the victim, right? I don't know, that jumped out at me. And we're seeing more of that happen now too, right? In people's character.
And the whole Republican Party is crying, they're
Yeah.
victimized, on the bigger scale.
Yes.
They're the very ones that are doing the damage. They're the perpetrators, and yet they're crying and got their supporters convinced we're all the victims.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everything's turned so upside down on people.
It's craziness.
It really makes you stop and think when you want to try to help somebody to, you know, to say what's going on. And I think I talked about this last night. But no matter how you play it out in your head, since they play like they're the victim, everything is turned around. So whatever you say, they can't see. Because they believe that's them instead. That's very hard to put into words without a clear example, if you understood that.
So
It
I
kinda
have
goes
a
along with it.
question.
Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So was that Lucifer's playbook?
To play the victim?
Yes.
Oh, good point, Phil. Yes, it sure was.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, he turned everything backwards.
Yep.
He tried to question God's character, not
And
his own.
it causes doubt and confusion in the minds of people
Yeah,
and draws sympathy and support.
right. Which he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, he took a third of the angels with him.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in all our fallings away. When we've had fallings away in this movement, people take sides over sympathy and pity for people. We've seen that.
Yeah, and that is something I still remember being back in Elk Grove when we were, Christina and Francisco, I don't even think were with us yet.
No.
But sitting there, and because we came in and not realizing that the path of the just issue was in the works. So when we came in, we just saw the path. We were brand new. We just saw the path of the just as being a part of a movement. We didn't know all the stuff that was going on, and then it starts to, to happen before our eyes. And I remember having read this in the Spirit of Prophecy in multiple places about the danger of sympathizing, and bringing that point up several times to people, and that we'd get to a point like that, and then there would be that whole sympathy. Susan might remember me bringing it up now and then, because I knew that no matter how hard it is, you might, you really care about this person or that person or whatever. You hate to see people go. You hate to see this. You hate to see that. But there was she put such a emphasis on the danger of sympathy, because you could get sucked into the falling away of people.
The emotionalism tied to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The sympathy plays on your emotion. And I forgot who said this, but if you want people to move, you motivate their emotions. You turn on their emotions rather than logic and reason.
Yep. More effective. People don't want to have to think.
So would anybody like to read here? I think we're at the top here.
Okay, I'll read.
Okay, Phil, thank you.
Oh, thank you for reading. So, Adventism has today real difficulties. They can't approach Donald Trump, the Republican Party, Russia, global politics, and the pandemic. They can't approach any of this from a prophetic position. They're trying to take it from a moral position. They're trying to be unifying rather than divisive. They have all these different divisions within them because they can't look at present day events prophetically. Does someone want to take what we've just said about this history, that's Trump of 2019, and take it back to Putin 2021? Graham, would you like to do that for us? So is Graham responding? So 2021 is Panium. What we've said in the past is simplistic, in simplistic terms, as the overthrow of King of the South, but it's also a changing of authoritarianism, of dictatorship, which is the same person, Vladimir Putin. just becoming more aggressive in his actions, and particularly at the moment we see throughout Ukraine. I'm not sure if that's what you're after. Elder Tess. Yes, that is exactly what I'm after. You're seeing the death and resurrection. We know that the King of the South fought an information war from, could we say, 2003, from the history of the Iraq War. There has been this conflict, which we call an information war, between the West and Russia, growing in intensity. When we say that Putin dies in 2021, we're symbolizing him with Hitler. We also know that beginning at Panium, a Cold War begins between Putin and the West. Therefore, he can't be dead. We know he's not dead because he is waging a war now, and that's what our prophetic narrative laid out for us, that there would be a Cold War from Panium to the Sunday Law. So this death symbolizes, just like it did with Trump, it is symbolizing a change of behavior that is moving from the context of an information war to that which is more accurately symbolized as a Cold War. We said that that would happen in the late months of 2021. Now there is overlap. It's complicated. There's a lot of overlap between saying something is an information war and saying that something is a Cold War, especially in the way that war is fought now. There's a lot of information war in a Cold War and quite a lot of Cold War in an information war. But we hope that if we look externally at what is happening right now, this is the largest troop mobilization since the end of the Cold War that's been happening since the late 2021 on the Ukrainian border. There is a change of behavior. So, a complicated present-day history taking us up to the Sunday Law, simple prophetic parable to help us step through that history and know where we are at and know where we're at. Josephine. Josephine replies, I just want to ask a question. So we're looking at Ukraine and Russia, and we're looking at NATO and America and the British sending troops, lining up there. But we know, is it correct for me to say that we know that it's going to be a Cold War and not a hot war? Or am I sort of assuming? Elder Tess. The original points that were made about the information war, I'll just explain the context a little. Raphia and Panium were already being taught in the movement by the end of 2018. And partly because of the complexity of the present day history, after the invention of the atomic weapons, wasn't really being understood prophetically or with prophetic glasses. The people within the movement were expecting Raphia and Panium to look like Russian tanks disembarking on Florida's beach, and Russians pouring on with semi-automatics and machine guns and bombs flying into Moscow. They're expecting a hot war between the two superpowers, Russia and the United States, direct hot war. So when Elder Tess started teaching that it would not look that way, that this was a war centered on information, disinformation, and manipulation of information that didn't discount war entirely. We know that we had Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, just to name a few. So she's not suggesting there won't be military conflict in Ukraine or in other countries, that it won't get very volatile between Russia and the West. What the whole context of us fighting against hot war was that hot war at that point in time in 2018 in the movement meant essentially Russian tanks on US soil. Does that make sense? Josephine, yes, thank you very much. That's really clear in my mind. Now, back to Elder Tess. There can be proxy wars within a Cold War. It can look quite heated at times. But with both globalization and the invention of nuclear weapons, the point of teaching on information war was, first of all, 1989, was the invention of the World Wide Web, WWW. Disinformation has been weaponized to an extent never seen before in the Earth's history. And that is the most dangerous form of warfare today. And it's also the form of warfare that we find internally and in the context of the Great Controversy. It centers on information streams. Remember that this is 2018. We're teaching two streams of information for the first time. And one of our evidences of that is the external way that the war is being fought now. Two streams externally, two streams internally. This, however, does not mean that there is not an armed conflict. We've seen that in Iraq, for example. So Putin is facing difficulty in 2021. If we know what happened with Navalny, Putin is very threatened, especially internally in 2021. And with his imprisonment of Navalny, we know the protests of 2021 was so full. Elder Tess thinks we can easily forget what took place in 2021, but what is particularly marked is a change of behavior. It's not like information war ended in a Cold War. Information war extends all the way through the end of Earth's history. It is trying to show us in this complicated mess of external events that we need to expect to see a change of behavior, and we saw that. Is everyone okay with this? If we leave that there, if we leave 2021 and we move on. Would someone else like to read?
I'll read.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, so here we are. Elder Tess stopped here and made a point about the Sunday law. We might just review that quickly. Does anyone want to revise or review that for us, to take the complication of history, take what we did here, and we went to a Bible verse. And from the Bible verse, we made a point about the Sunday law. James, do you remember that? And James says, was this last week's study, Elder Tess? Yes, but I know that it moved quickly at the end. So if you don't want to, or if it doesn't recall easily, that's fine. If you can think of any, oh, you weren't on last week. I'm sorry. Elder Tess, is there anyone else? Catherine? Catherine, we looked at Daniel 11:40. Elder Tess, can you read for us the relevant parts? Catherine, it had to do with the many being overthrown. Do you want to read the verse? I can bring it up. Daniel 11:40 through 41. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall push at him, and the king of the north shall come up against him like a whirlwind, chariots and horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. Yea, the many being overthrown. We're talking about the Sunday law, and we know that many will be overthrown of people that are in God's kingdom, which means in this movement, because to escape, to be taken out of God's hand means you have to be taken out of this movement. This is my understanding. And so many will be overthrown means that people will be lost at that point. And the question was poised, if we predicted something really dramatic, visible like, something you could clearly see and it happened like balls of fire out of the sky or something like that. If that was predicted and that actually occurred at the Sunday law, who would leave the movement? Because you would see that fulfillment. And so you wouldn't even leave the movement if you had some grudge with the leadership or some issues with something that had to do with the message or something to do with equality or issues of gender or whatever. If it was that sort of easy to see, you wouldn't leave. So how can people be overthrown? It implies that it must not be so visible as that. Otherwise, they wouldn't leave. So we have that diagram again. I think we've been over that. Cold
Many.
War and many overthrown at the Sunday law.
Mhm.
Okay. Elder Tess, that's spot on. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Catherine, no. Elder Tess, Brendan, you raised your hand. Were you going to say something? Were you going to kind of say what Catherine said that reflects what your thoughts were? Brendan, yes. Elder Tess, can you repeat that in your own words? Explain in your own words on the Sunday law. Brendan, so if many are overthrown at the Sunday law, therefore most people in the movement do not understand what it looks like. It must be so messy. And if was such a clear-cut event like fire, balls hitting an American city, like what Elder Jeff predicted, many wouldn't be overthrown. So we know that prophecy can't look like balls of falling out of the sky. So exactly what you're going through now is exactly what prophecy looks like. It is very complicated. It's what you're saying, and I guess since many people are going to be overthrown, it is not going to be easily seen. Elder Tess, both of you hit the nail on the head. That is a good review of what we said, Daniel 11:41. Many inside the movement are overthrown there at the Sunday law. There are hands up and I want to hear them. Josephine, her reply. If the people in the movement that are overthrown, what about the many in Adventism as a whole? Because they don't understand this complicated history. Would they be overthrown? Elder Tess, it's complicated because we teach that Adventism is shipwrecked at the Sunday law, don't we? But I think taking those other parables aside, what we take from 41, verse 41, kind of in the context of the verse, is that to be overthrown, you have to be standing. And in the context of Acts 27, Adventism is standing till the Sunday law. Again, it gives us a simple story of Adventism that other parables help break down for us. With Daniel 11:41, we teach that many is members of the movement because it has to be people who are standing. You can't overthrow someone who's already overthrown, and it would be like sending people back to Babylon who never left. Does that make sense? Josephine, yes, that makes a lot of sense because as I don't know, I've been studying Acts because I'm delivering it, the last part of it. So I wanted to make sense of that and how it compares to many here in Daniel 11:41. And like you said, I understand it very well now. Elder Tess, that was a good question, but I think that sometimes, so we don't become tangled, we need to divide up our parables. And Acts 27 is, I love that parable so much, but it can entangle with some of the others. For example, are we within the conference structure all the way to the Sunday law? It teaches us a couple of points very well, but in a very narrow, specific fashion. To not become tangled, we need to divide and kind of keep the two separate. Graham, you had your hand up. Graham, I didn't hear Brandon or Catherine cover it, but I just want to bring out the point of fear. So fear is something that is missing when you have the comparison between the complicated play of human events that we see now leading up to the Sunday law, and that the Sunday law compared to the fireballs or something coming out of the sky. So when you got that fear that keeps you in the movement, another one, the fear is gone. So where do you lie now? Elder Tess, I kind of see fear in both, but different types of fear. Graham, I guess so. The way I was viewing it is the prophecy neatly laid out in the structure gives you this fear of God. And for me, I almost see this fear being removed when we see the events we see taking place around us today, and understanding that we're growing with the complicated play of human events. Not that there's not fear there, but it doesn't seem to be something that stops you making a decision whether you stay or you go in the movement. Elder Tess. So we have security and understanding. Is that what you're describing? Graham. Yes, I think when you have a more holistic understanding of events that are taking place around us, it sheds that fear. But in the fear, some sort of event taking place that is visible and predicted, that fear is there and that keeps you within the movement. It seems to be a dividing piece. Elder Tess, it's very emotional, isn't it? In a way, when you're just looking for such an event. So I agree with you. I think I need to think about that some more. I think not discounting that, I can think that some people, though, can also find comfort in thinking that it's just going to be simple. And then it's a comfort that we don't really need to understand everything. We don't need to worry too much because we will just see it. And when we see it, we'll just do the right thing. If it's just Sabbath and Sunday, I'll just see it in Congress and then I'll keep Sabbath anyway. and then my salvation will be secured. I think shaking people from that can also cause a different type of fear as well. It can be securing to feel like God has shut every door, every kind of way out of salvation, and not given us any room to hang doubt upon. That would comfort me. But I know that God hasn't, and there are hooks for my doubt. But I think we're describing two quite different types of fear. It is good to bring fear into the discussion. Just to add on a couple of thoughts with what was shared, I see we have this picture of World War I, World War II, or kind of overlapping. Again, it's a little bit complicated, but we see this conflict between Putin and the West through all this time, particularly from the George Bush era, George Bush Jr. through to 2021. And then we're going to see end of 2021. This radical transformation where Putin, and really it kind of came as a bit of shock to many because Biden was soft. He was soft on Putin because he was going after Xi and China. But, next page. Then all of a sudden, there's this escalation, and they are calling it the new Cold War. And it's the greatest troop mobilization for sure since that time period. Same diagram. I'll read this next paragraph and then someone else can finish. Then we come to the Sunday law of Daniel 11:41. And again, Elder Tess just wanted us to see the past. In the past, we see our parables teach this simple, and reality is this, the simple reality. Complicated, but the parables, they are what an anchor. They are what an anchor us. We're anchored by understanding these first four trumpets. Otherwise, how would we know how Western Rome fell? It would just have given us a headache, and then we wouldn't be sure. It helps to explain Western Rome fell. It looked like this. Greece fell, kind of looked like this. The US is falling, Russia falling, and then we have parables to illustrate that. But the reality of walking through that history does not look exactly like the simple. You can see it enough to be anchored. We can see it enough at the end of 2021 to be an anchored. That's the whole point of it. But what we don't have is no room to hang our doubts. What we don't have is just a simple story to explain a simple history, because history and present day is never simple. So, board work, as it was in the beginning of this. Prophetic, four trumpets, and the reality is complex. So, someone else can read.
I'll read for me. Was somebody else going to want to read? Okay, I'll read for me. Go ahead.
So when we come to the Sunday law, many are going to be overthrown. So if Elder Tess stood up tomorrow and say, balls of fire are going to fall on Nashville on February 2nd, 2026, and that will be the day of the Sunday law, what Elder Tess is saying is a simple prophecy, and it's going to look simple, but that's not how it works. And then when we get to that date, February 2nd, and the balls of fire fell on Nashville, I wouldn't leave. You wouldn't leave. She doubts that anyone would leave because your faith is anchored on the external event. Faith is anchored on seeing simple prophecy, simple parables that explain simple history. But this is where people get tangled if their faith is hooked on seeing simplicity, clarity, and simplicity. It's clear, but you have to see the complicated play of human events. If we describe how Laodicean mindset would view the Sunday law, discounting what we should be learning, have learned, and have been learning by now, what do we think happens at the Sunday law? We think Putin dies, because isn't this like a deadly wound and a death? Putin dies, simple, right? Russia dies, simple, right? US turns fascist, church and state union, simple, right? And then what do you think begins? Many of us would probably say, no. We know that it isn't the truth, but what we might envision is world peace, conflict, fall of King of the South, United States of dictatorship. And then, what do you think happens after the Sunday law? It's just world peace, essentially, because the US is running everything. We should consider what it doesn't look like that at Panium. But we shouldn't consider that it doesn't look like that at Panium, and it doesn't look like that at the Sunday law. Do we really think that Xi in China, who has called Putin his very best friend in the whole wide world, his best friend, is just going to let Russia dissolve and let Putin be humiliated by the US? Do you think that North Korea is going to let that happen? North Korea is seeing conflict and is now testing and demonstrating its weapons arsenal in a way it hasn't done in years. Iran is acting belligerent, and if it chooses to go ahead, it can have a nuclear warhead in approximately 3 to 4 weeks. They have been in the stage for a while. They could head for it. They could have one in 3 to 4 weeks. Israel has essentially said that if US doesn't stop Iran, and we think that they're going for it, we'll go to war with Iran without you, now that we have nuclear powers. We have regional conflict with massive weapons. If we think that the Sunday law and some type of fall of the US is going to bring about a type of world peace at the Sunday law, Elder Tess suggests that we're in for more trouble than we can imagine. If we think that the progressiveness in the US is just going to see the rise of fascism and not fight back, we have a little bit more trouble ahead of us, more than we can necessarily imagine. But we know that God gives us parables and prophetic light for the dispensation that we're in. We needed to understand 2001 to 2021. That's part of the early reign of the 144,000. So from 2001 to 2021, that was a time period that we were walking in. So that is a time period God had to give us prophetic light to understand. Now we're walking from 2021 to the Sunday law. The point is, we're walking in a new dispensation. As we walk from 2021 to the Sunday law, we have more to understand. And when we get closer to the Sunday law, we don't necessarily have the complete clarity on what the history after the Sunday law looks like. We're not changing what we have taught in the past, but seeing that as we get closer and our vision clears, these waymarks are complex, and we're not heading towards global peace. This brings us up to what we've discussed in last week's class. From 2001 to the Sunday law is the early reign for the 144,000. We're tangled there, but we've still had these changes in dispensation, and we still aren't into the Sunday law itself to see exactly what that looks like. We'll have that clarity when we need it. Does anyone have a comment or a question? Does that make sense, Marie? Marie says, I just want to clarify. Is this still a death at Panium for Putin leading up to the Sunday law? You sort of spoke about China not allowing him to be defeated. I know that you're trying to make a point, but I just wondered from a simplistic prophetic picture, is this still the case? Anybody else want to read? Okay,
I'll read it.
go ahead.
Oh, somebody else?
No.
I can read a little bit.
Okay.
But once we get on a little further in history,
Oh,
you
wait,
can look.
up here, the top.
Is that elder test? Okay, I'm sorry. Elder test. Yes, I'm not trying to change what we've taught in the past. What I'm trying to do is to have us discuss and consider what these things look like. I found a quote that I really liked. This is completely different topic. It's dealing with 2014 Gamergate. There was an article written in 2016 about Donald Trump and the 2016 election. In 2014 Gamergate, the events relating to the alt-right were not taken very seriously. By the end of 2016, what they're seeing is that they can now trace what led to Donald Trump. Now, you could take from 2009 and the Tea Party, you could take it through a few different waymarks, but this article in 2016, referencing Trump's election, it says, everything we're seeing now had its precedent 2 years ago. Now, 2 years ago in 2014, people can't see that those events are going to lead them to Trump's fascism, ipsis, and the fall of the US.
That's another interesting point there too, where I think maybe we were talking about it earlier this morning, I don't remember, but the judge, Ludig, however you say his name, the one that testified in the hearing, that there was an article in the Washington Post about, his testimony. And I don't know if anybody else read it. I think, I don't remember if it's one that Susan posted. I don't think it was. But in listening to his testimony and the way the article read, it almost seemed like they didn't really make the connection. He still hasn't made the connection between, like Trump and his supporters were still in clear and present danger. So he does say supporters, but what I got out of it, if I read it correctly, is that it seems like he's saying not directly, but that implying that, something has to be done about Trump. Kind of like if you do something about Trump, his supporters are gone, and that handles it. But we can see, and this is the point I want to get out of this part, and then another article that talks about backing it up to the beginning of these people, but even further back, taking it to what Elder Tess said about Steve Bannon today, and what he recognized in the gaming industry. So it's really not just Trump. Does that make sense? If you get rid of Trump, you still have these people that have now been unleashed.
You still have those Supreme Court that you can't
Yeah,
undo.
that too.
The problems with the GOP and all the destruction they did there, cleaning it out, the GOP, the Republican Party, you can't change that.
But you have this, the far right supporters, the ones that the Proud Boys and all of those groups, you have all those that are involved behind. I don't know, behind the scenes isn't the right way, but how they've gotten ready is behind the scenes using internet social media platforms. And we see how fast they can mobilize for something. And now what she's showing us is the far left and what they represent and how they're going to come together or are coming together with those on the far right, but from different motivations. So to me, it struck me as what it seemed to be. I just kind of picked up, and if anybody else read it, let me know if you guys saw it differently. But what I seem to pick up from it is that if you take care of Trump, then we've saved the democracy and we're not in danger. We can get to a place where we're not in danger, but we can see, we already know what 2014 represents, that turning point. We saw in 2016 what the people chose. And so this is on a trajectory to the Sunday law, regardless. But I think the point that I feel like what I was getting out of it is that they still don't completely identify the problem.
Right. Exactly.
That's what I seem to get out of that.
I see that with the people around me too. They think, oh, this will be all over soon. It'll get back to normal. It'll be okay.
And it's not getting better.
But yeah, and it's not going to get better. It can't. No, it can't. It just can't.
Yeah.
That one sentence in that paragraph, it's the very end there. I think that's where your thoughts were going, or they did go, Elaine. Everything we see, just lower that down a little bit at the top of the page, yeah. You could take it, it's the very last paragraph. You could take it through a few different waymarks, but this article, I think that's the same one. Yeah, everything we're seeing now had its precedent 2 years ago. Now, 2 years ago, in 2014, people can't see that those events are going to lead them to Trump's fascism, abscess, and the fall of the US.
Yeah, and that was an article about an article in 2016 pointing to Gamergate as being, Gamergate wasn't wasn't given the attention that it needed and should have had. That situation is what you're now visually seeing in what Donald Trump represents and who he is.
Exactly. And as it was said, it is irreversible. It's already on the trajectory to, for
All you
the
can do is-
consequences of it all will
All
be
you can do
seen.
is prayerfully get on the right side.
Yeah.
I'll just read one more paragraph and someone else can jump in. But once we get on a little further in history, you can look back and say, oh yeah, that's how US fell. So when we get into the future history, Elder Tess thinks that we should be able to look back and see that what Putin did at the end of 2021, first of all, it was quite unhinged. Secondly, it's not something that he can come out of successfully. Not saying what it would exactly look like. It will be a failure, but it's not something that you can just come out of successfully. His steps have been political suicide. It has been very unhinged. When we trace the decisions that have been made, the conflict with the West, Elder Tess believes that we will be able to trace his fall, especially what he had done at the end of 2021. What does that fall look like? And what do we call a complete fall? In this time period, in this context with globalization and the backing that he has. Anybody else would like to jump in?
I'll go ahead. Just to take what we have already discussed to this story of Panium is talking about the deadly wound and death is really simple. What that actually looks like is complicated. 2014 is a really good example. We see that at the Sunday Law, the US is fascist. We look back at 2014 with the benefit of hindsight now and we say, yeah, that was a real key point, a turning point when the US started to fall into fascism. We can already see by the end of 2016 that everything that they were seeing under Trump had its precedent in 2014. Sometimes it takes time to understand the complications and the steps of how that became a political fall. Does that make sense, Marie? And Marie says, yes, it does. Thank you. I just picture Putin hanging on tooth and nail because we know we have the lines. It just seems like he's hanging on tooth and nails because he knows that he's dead or dying. The reason why I picture it that way is because we have the lines to show us. Elder Tess says, yes. I wasn't really meaning for us to go right into Panium in these classes. We'll do that in the future in camp meetings and in different meetings. I do think that we can see. My only point that I wanted to address is that in a kind of a simplistic fashion was the change of behavior, showed us the fall into fascism of the glorious land, a waymark in that fall. That was all in the lines of the revolutions. But when we take it down here, we'll look at the board work here in a second, we can see a change in behavior in Putin that will have a political impact. We need to see the complications, especially when we see that this is not Russia versus the US on its own. Simply, yes, complicated story, no. This is the West versus Russia, China, North Korea, Syria, Iran, Venezuela, etc. This is one of the complications. We need to expect to see the Sunday Law and the history through that as complicated, just like the fall of the Western Rome, just like the fall of Greece, just like our parables are teaching us. We need to be careful not to get lost in the complexity. The simple is still accurate. We're given the simplistic narrative because God knows full well that if we only had the complexity, we will be lost. We won't know how to orient ourselves. We'll have no idea where we are. So we need to hang on to the simple. We need to hang on to the lines and the parables. Without them, Adventism has no idea where we're at in world history. They are valuable. They are not diminished. But we do need to see that it is complicated, or we won't believe that these parables are accurate. We made our points about the Sunday Law, and if it was any less complicated, Elder Tess doesn't think that people would simply leave the movement over doctrinal disagreements. If they could hang on to the fireballs over Nashville anchor for their faith, they would. They won't have that. They didn't have that in 2014. They didn't have that in 2019. They didn't have that in 2021, and they won't have that for the Sunday Law. We have to be anchored in the parable and the message. So complicated, the complexities of it, I think is what's helped ground us a little, anchor us a little bit better. I was thinking about how I think it was in Susan's study with fractals, about how I pictured it in my mind. Where were we before the midnight cry? Where were we in understanding before the midnight cry? And the way I picture it in my mind is really not knowing where we were going, but just, and I don't know if I'm going to explain this right. We had no idea of destination. I guess, I mean, we know eternity, that type thing, but literally on the line, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the lines gave us a structure that was sound, so that we knew our direction and knew our course. Whereas the course before, there was no structure, there was no structure that gave you a solid anchor. And if you fell into that trap of that no solid anchor, and many did, then they fell into that trap. And I know that I did too, but some of us recognized the truth when we heard it. When the midnight cry came, we saw it. We saw it and we understood it. But those that stayed with that were able to accept the prediction about Nashville, and then wound up sorely disappointed. So the structures, to me, the structures and all the information in the lines that we've been learning have better anchored us, if that makes sense.
Well, the structure is consistent,
Yes.
and structure is just that. It's structure. You're not pulling things out of thin air. You're not
Good
pulling a
word
rabbit.
for that. Good way to phrase that. Yes, thank you.
And so when you see it, it gives you confidence in where we were, where we are, and where we're heading, because it's consistent. There is no wavering. And so, yeah, I'm very grateful for this parable methodology that we're learning, because this is where we are hanging our faith on.
Yep. Yeah, and pulling things out of thin air. I guess that's a good way to put what it seemed like. And then just hope that you were right. Wait to see. That doesn't anchor or strengthen people or build
Yeah,
confidence.
Yeah, that's false hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for doing the transcripts like you have. I'm sure it's been a tremendous blessing to you. I wish I could have done it.
Yeah, no, and I'll send the rest that I've done. And another thing that I want to add to this is not just the content of Elder Tessa's materials and the subjects that she's teaching, but I really, as we're watching these videos, I don't know if it's just me, or if anybody watching those videos have really paid attention to how, not just the what she teaches, but how she teaches, the interactions. Because for example, like for me, when I am trying to understand the questions by Brendan and Josephine Marie, when they're asking their questions, or they're replying or trying to reply to Elder Tessa's questions, I don't fully understand their questions or their replies. Yet Elder Tess is very gentle and very gracious, and she has a way of clearing out the noise of the replies, clearing out the noise of the questions, and she's able to pick out. I mean, even though maybe the questions were wrong, or their reply was wrong, or their mindset was wrong, Elder Tess has a gift of pulling out something that is correct. She'll pick out something that is good in what they say, and she'll ignore the noise, and she'll go with, it's like, for some of us less seasoned, like myself, I will say something like, no, that's wrong. But I've never heard her say that. And what I've realized is that she'll pick out something that is correct, that is right, and go with it. That'll give confidence to the questioner, or to the replier. It'll lift them up.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, it's just something that I think, I know I need to develop. And as we listen to other people, so I think it'll be very helpful for us to develop that skill, because when we talk to other people, there is going to be a lot of noise. And I know for me, we need to get rid of the noise and see what it is, the heart of the question or the heart of the response, and go with that to to encourage them, to lift them up, and not to shut them down. And I think that's to me, it's a critical lesson, critical skill that I myself need to develop.
Probably all of us. Yes, she does it very well in these classes. And we'll have, like when you say we'll have noise, yeah, there will be, because I know that I've seen it over the years and I've not always handled it right. Somebody new comes along and we come from, most of us have come from Adventism, and we've got all our Adventism nonsense in us. And we come to this and we're ready to tell you our tell people in the movement our nonsense. And she makes you comfortable to, and I'm not saying they were saying nonsense, I'm talking that's what we're going to be dealing with, you know what I mean? But having a way to be able to handle them in such a way that they don't feel intimidated or you know, and then want to turn and leave. So it's a very good point. We all need it.
Yes, I had a thought to what Phil was saying. Because, you know, each one of us are so different. I mean, in our characters, personalities, wherever we are, coming from different backgrounds. But I see in these classroom settings, like Phil says, it's, yes, Elder Tess is seasoned in this for sure. But yet each one, it's like a puzzle, because I see each one that she calls upon, or they raise their hand, they have a question or a thought to what she is expressing or teaching, that each one's voice is so important. And even if they're a little bit need to be tweaked or whatever the term might be, you know, in their understanding, but that's where more understanding comes through, at least for me, is I'm learning from these other believers that are in that class with Elder Tess, and each one with their minds and their thoughts and their study that they're doing is, you know, encouraging each other, really. That's what I see it as. And it also encourages Elder Tess, because she gets this input, you know, from others. It's not all just everything's coming from her, but she's hearing input from others, and she can guide and direct, you know, with that input that she's hearing, to help others, to strengthen others. And it's encouraging for everyone all together, you know, and it's growth. Me, it's growth. And I feel like I'm always missing something. If I just don't want to miss anything, because I'm always learning, as we all are. You know, God is guiding and directing us, and this is such a blessing. You know, whenever God's people are together, you know, we're learning from one another. But as we're studying this complexity of this message, and yet it can be more simplified, you know, as we're learning, it can be more simplified, and that way we can shut out all the noise, things that really aren't important, but be guided into that, even if we were espousing noise, you know. So it's yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. I hope I can get a little bit of clarity through in my thoughts too.
Let's close in prayer, and then I want to stop the recording, and we can still talk if you want a little bit. I'll go ahead and pray. Almighty God, Lord, we thank you for these classes. We thank you for impressing upon our hearts the significance of what it is that you're teaching us, and for also sort of opening up our schedule in a way to be able to bring it in so that we can put our focus here. I pray for each one of us, Lord, to strive to enter into that straight gate, to purpose in our hearts that we desire to pass this test and that we do everything on our part necessary. Because it is within us, Lord. It's our choice. And I pray that we make choices consistent with our desires and with the direction that this movement is going. We pray for the leadership of this movement. We ask a special blessing upon Elder Tess and Elder Parmenter and all the leaders. We pray for the congregation all around the world. That we would be faithful and endure to the end. We thank you for the privilege and the blessing of being here. As we close out our study for the Sabbath, we ask you to help us to go in the strength of what we learned throughout this new coming week until we meet again on Wednesday. And may you help us as we try to dissect the articles that need to be read and understood. That we could understand what's wrong with the right and what's wrong with the left, and be on the right path every step of the way. May we understand our course as well, Lord. It's not about our own salvation, but about the work that you've called us to do for others. So may we give our lives a living sacrifice for the sake of others. So may you bless us and guide us and direct us. We thank you and we praise you and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.